You think you know the story of the Battle of the Atlantic? German U-boats prowling the depths like steel sharks, Allied convoys racing across dangerous waters, the thunder of depth charges exploding in the dark ocean. But what if I told you that the weapon that finally turned the tide against the Nazi submarine menace wasn't louder than conventional explosives? It was completely silent until the moment it killed you. This is the story they don't want you to know. The story of the Hedgehog mortar, a revolutionary anti-submarine weapon so secret that German U-boat commanders never understood how it worked, even as it systematically destroyed their boats beneath the waves. How Allied naval engineers created a weapon that attacked the fundamental assumptions German submariners had developed about underwater warfare. How silence became more deadly than thunder, and how the absence of sound became the harbinger of death itself. But this isn't just another tale of technological innovation or naval warfare. This is the untold story of Kapitänleutnant Hans Müller and Lieutenant Commander Robert Hedge Morrison, two submarine hunters on opposite sides of a war who would discover that sometimes the most devastating weapons are the ones you never hear coming. How a device that cost less than a torpedo became more feared than the largest depth charges, and how the terror of the unknown proved more effective than the most powerful explosives. Welcome to the silent war beneath the Atlantic, where death came without warning, and where the most experienced submarine commanders found themselves helpless against an enemy they couldn't understand, couldn't predict, and couldn't escape. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about naval warfare, the nature of technological surprise, and the price of fighting an enemy who has learned to weaponize uncertainty itself. March 15, 1942, North Atlantic, 400 miles southwest of Iceland. Kapitänleutnant Hans Müller peers through the periscope of U-507, watching a convoy of Allied merchant ships crawl across the grey waters like a herd of steel whales. At 34, Müller is one of Germany's most experienced U-boat commanders, with 18 months of combat patrols and 14 confirmed sinkings to his credit. He survived the early days of the war when U-boats operated with near impunity, and he's adapted to the increasingly sophisticated Allied anti-submarine measures that have made hunting convoys a deadly game of cat and mouse. The convoy before him, designated HX-229 by Allied intelligence, consists of 43 merchant vessels escorted by 6 destroyers and 2 corvettes. It's a tempting target, but Müller knows that attacking it will require all the skill and experience he's accumulated during 2 years of submarine warfare. Is range to lead merchant vessel? He asks his executive officer, Oberleutnant Klaus Weber. Shoot 4,000 meters, bearing 090 degrees. Convoy speed estimated at 8 knots, zigzag pattern Charlie Delta. Müller nods, calculating the attack geometry in his head. The convoy is following a predictable evasive pattern, changing course every few minutes to make torpedo attacks more difficult. But predictability is a weakness that experienced submarine commanders can exploit. Shuns prepare tubes 1 through 4 for attack. Set depth 3 meters, spread pattern alpha. For the attack that follows is textbook submarine warfare, executed with the precision that has made German U-boats the terror of the Atlantic shipping lanes. Müller's torpedoes find their targets, sending 2 merchant vessels to the bottom in massive explosions that light up the night sky. But the real test comes when the escort vessels respond to the attack. The destroyer HMS Volunteer, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Robert Morrison, immediately begins the systematic search pattern that has become standard procedure for anti-submarine operations. Morrison is 29 years old, a Royal Navy officer who has been hunting U-boats for 18 months, and has developed an intuitive understanding of how German submarine commanders think and operate. Sonar contact, bearing 270 degrees, range 1,500 yards, reports Petty Officer James Chen from the sonar compartment. Classification? Morrison asks, though he already knows the answer from the distinctive sound signature. Definite submarine contact, sir. Twin screws, diesel-electric propulsion, probably type Seats IC U-boat. Morrison smiles grimly, understanding that he's found the submarine responsible for the torpedo attack. But he also knows that locating a U-boat is only the first step in a complex underwater duel that requires patience, skill, and no small amount of luck. All ahead full. Prepare depth charge attack. Pattern Delta. Set charges for 150 and 200 feet. The depth charge attack that follows represents the state-of-the-art in anti-submarine warfare circa 1942. 24 cylindrical explosives, each containing 300 pounds of TNT, are dropped in a carefully calculated pattern designed to bracket the submarine's estimated position. The charges are set to explode at predetermined depths, creating a massive underwater explosion that can crush a submarine's hull or damage its systems enough to force it to surface. Muller, listening to the approaching destroyer through his hydrophones, recognizes the sound of depth charges being prepared for launch. He's survived dozens of such attacks during his career, and he knows exactly what to expect. "Jas, depth charges incoming," he announces to his crew. "Jas, all hands brace for impact." Silent running procedures in effect. The explosions that follow are tremendous, shaking U-507 like a toy in the hands of an angry child. Light bulbs shatter, instruments jump off their mounts, and several crew members are thrown to the deck by the concussion. But the submarine's hull remains intact, and Muller knows that he's survived another depth charge attack. As damage report E, he orders, though he's already confident that the attack has failed to achieve a killing blow. The minor flooding in the forward torpedo room, electrical damage to the radio equipment, no hull breaches, all systems operational. It's exactly the kind of result that Mueller has come to expect from depth charge attacks. The weapons are powerful, but they're also imprecise. They explode at predetermined depths whether they're near a submarine or not, and their effectiveness depends entirely on the accuracy of the attacking vessel's estimate of the submarine's position. More importantly, the explosions tell the submarine crew exactly what's happening. When depth charges detonate, everyone within miles knows that an anti-submarine attack is in progress. The submarine commander can count the explosions, estimate their distance, and make tactical decisions based on the pattern and intensity of the attack. "They missed us by at least 50 meters, Muller tells his crew with the confidence of a commander who has survived many such encounters. "Maintain silent running. We'll wait for them to move on, then surface and continue our patrol." But what Muller doesn't know is that the Royal Navy has been developing a new anti-submarine weapon that will fundamentally change the nature of underwater warfare. A weapon that attacks the very assumptions that experienced submarine commanders like Muller have developed about depth charge attacks. The weapon is called the Hedgehog, and it's about to make its combat debut aboard HMS Volunteer. 3,000 miles away, at the British Admiralty's Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, a team of engineers and naval officers has been working on solutions to the fundamental problems with conventional depth charge attacks. The primary issue, as identified by operational research analysts, is that depth charges explode whether they hit their target or not. This means that attacking vessels can't distinguish between successful and unsuccessful attacks, and submarine commanders can use the sound of explosions to track the progress of anti-submarine operations. The problem with depth charges, explains Commander Charles Goodeve, the department's technical director, is that they're fundamentally defensive weapons. They create a lot of noise and destruction, but they don't provide any feedback about whether they've actually hit their target. The solution that Goodeve's team develops is elegantly simple and devastatingly effective. Instead of dropping large charges that explode at predetermined depths, why not fire smaller charges that only explode when they make contact with a submarine's hull? The Hedgehog mortar that emerges from this concept is unlike any anti-submarine weapon previously developed. Instead of dropping charges behind the attacking vessel, it fires 24 small projectiles forward, creating a circular pattern of contact-fused explosives that sink silently toward their target. Each Hedgehog projectile contains only 35 pounds of explosive, a fraction of the 300 pounds in a conventional depth charge, but the contact fuses mean that every explosion indicates a direct hit on the target, and the forward-firing capability allows attacking vessels to maintain sonar contact throughout the attack. Most importantly, if the projectiles miss their target, they sink to the bottom without exploding. The absence of explosions tells the attacking vessel that the attack has failed, but it also tells the submarine crew nothing about what just happened. It's psychological warfare, explains Lieutenant Commander Morrison during a briefing on the new weapon system. German submarine commanders have learned to interpret depth charge attacks based on the sound of explosions. But with Hedgehog, silence doesn't mean safety. It means uncertainty. The first Hedgehog systems are installed on selected Royal Navy destroyers in early 1942, but their deployment is kept strictly secret. German intelligence has no knowledge of the new weapon, and Allied naval commanders are instructed to use conventional depth charges alongside Hedgehog attacks to maintain the deception. Morrison's destroyer, HMS Volunteer, receives its Hedgehog installation in February 1942, making it one of the first vessels equipped with the revolutionary anti-submarine weapon. But Morrison and his crew have had only limited training with the system, and they're about to test it in combat for the first time. The opportunity comes during the attack on convoy HX-229, when Morrison's sonar operators detect Mueller's U-boat after the torpedo attack on the merchant vessels. "Sir, we have a solid contact on the submarine," reports Petty Officer Chen. "Range 1,200 yards, bearing steady. Recommend Hedgehog attack." Morrison hesitates for a moment, understanding that he's about to use an untested weapon against an experienced enemy. But he also knows that conventional depth charge attacks have proven inadequate against skilled submarine commanders, and that new tactics require new weapons. Prepare Hedgehog attack. Set range for 1,200 yards, bearing 270 degrees. The Hedgehog mortar that fires from HMS Volunteer's forward deck creates a distinctive sound, a rapid series of muffled thumps, as 24 projectiles are launched in quick succession. But unlike depth charges, which create massive explosions regardless of their effectiveness, the Hedgehog projectiles sink silently toward their target. Aboard U-507, Mueller and his crew hear the sound of the Hedgehog launch, but they don't recognize it as an anti-submarine weapon. The muffled thumping is unlike anything they've encountered before, and the absence of immediate explosions suggests that whatever the destroyer fired has missed its target. "What was that sound?" asks Oberleutnant Weber, listening to the hydrophones with a puzzled expression. "Unknown," Mueller replies, equally confused by the unfamiliar acoustic signature. Possibly a new type of signal rocket or communication device. Maintain silent running. It's exactly the kind of misinterpretation that the Hedgehog's designers hoped to achieve. German submarine commanders have been trained to recognize the sound signatures of all known Allied anti-submarine weapons, but the Hedgehog is so new and so different that it doesn't fit any existing category. The 24 projectiles sink through the dark water toward U-507, their contact fuses armed and ready to detonate on impact with the submarine's hull. Mueller and his crew wait in silence, listening for the explosions that will tell them whether the destroyer's attack has succeeded or failed. But the silence continues, and Mueller begins to relax, believing that whatever the destroyer fired has missed its target completely. "No explosions," he observes with satisfaction. "Whatever they were trying to do, it didn't work. Prepare to change depth and bearing. We'll move away from this area and continue our patrol." And what Mueller doesn't know is that 3 of the Hedgehog projectiles have landed within the lethal radius of his submarine, and that they're sinking toward U-507's hull with the inexorable precision of guided weapons. The first projectile strikes the submarine's forward ballast tank at 0347 hours, its contact fuse detonating 35 pounds of high explosive against the pressure hull. The explosion is smaller than a conventional depth charge, but it's also much more focused, concentrating all its energy against a single point on the submarine's structure. The second and third projectiles hit within seconds of each other, one striking the conning tower and another penetrating the submarine's outer hull near the engine room. The combined effect of 3 direct hits is devastating, creating multiple hull breaches that flood the submarine faster than its pumps can handle. "We're hit!" Weber shouts over the sound of rushing water and failing electrical systems. "Multiple hull breaches, flooding in all compartments." Mueller stares in shock at the damage reports, unable to understand how his submarine has been destroyed by an attack that he never heard coming. There were no explosions to warn him, no pattern of near misses to indicate the enemy's targeting accuracy. One moment his submarine was safe, and the next it was dying. "Have emergency surface, blow all ballast tanks," Mueller orders, but he already knows it's too late. U-507 is taking on water faster than it can be expelled, and the submarine's death dive has already begun. The last thing Mueller hears before his submarine breaks apart under the crushing pressure of the Atlantic depths is the sound of his own voice, asking a question that will haunt the nightmares of German submarine commanders for the rest of the war. What the hell just happened? Aboard HMS Volunteer, Morrison and his crew watch their sonar screens as the submarine contact disappears. replaced by the distinctive sound signature of a vessel breaking apart underwater. "Contact lost, sir," reports Petty Officer Chen. "It sounds like she's going down." Morrison nods grimly, understanding that he's just witnessed the first successful combat use of a weapon that will change the nature of anti-submarine warfare forever. But he also understands that the real power of the Hedgehog isn't just its ability to sink submarines, it's its ability to do so without warning, creating a new kind of terror that attacks the psychological foundations of submarine warfare. "Log the attack as successful," Morrison orders. And remember, everything about this weapon system is classified. No one discusses Hedgehog operations outside of official channels. The secrecy surrounding the Hedgehog deployment is about to become one of the most important factors in the Battle of the Atlantic, creating a psychological weapon that's as effective as the physical destruction it causes. German submarine commanders are about to discover that the ocean has become a much more dangerous place, but they won't understand why until it's too late to adapt their tactics to counter the new threat. April 28, 1942. U-boat headquarters, Lorient, France. Conter-Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's submarine fleet, stares at the latest casualty reports with growing concern and confusion. In the past 6 weeks, 12 German U-boats have been lost in the North Atlantic under circumstances that don't match any known Allied anti-submarine tactics. The submarines simply disappear without warning, with no distress signals, no reports of depth charge attacks, and no survivors to explain what happened. "Oh, the pattern doesn't make sense," Dönitz tells his staff during the morning briefing. "These boats are being destroyed by experienced commanders who know how to survive depth charge attacks, but there's no evidence of conventional anti-submarine warfare in any of these losses." Kapitän zur See Eberhard Gott, Dönitz's chief of staff, spreads a chart of the North Atlantic across the conference table, marking the locations where U-boats have been lost. The losses are concentrated along the main convoy routes, but they're not associated with any reported surface actions. It's as if our submarines are simply vanishing. The mystery deepens when German intelligence analysts review intercepted Allied radio traffic from the areas where U-boats have been lost. Instead of the usual reports of depth charge attacks and submarine hunts, they find routine convoy communications with no mention of anti-submarine operations. Either the Allies have developed a new type of anti-submarine weapon that our commanders don't recognize, Gott observes, or they've learned to destroy our boats without leaving any evidence of how they're doing it. Dönitz nods grimly, understanding that his submarine fleet is facing a threat that challenges everything they know about underwater warfare. The loss rate is becoming unsustainable, but more importantly, the mystery surrounding the losses is beginning to affect the morale of his remaining submarine commanders. "What do our surviving commanders report about these areas?" Dönitz asks. "That's the strangest part," Gott replies, consulting a folder of patrol reports. "Several boats have operated in the same areas where others have been lost, and they report normal anti-submarine activity. Depth charges, sonar searches, the usual harassment, nothing that would explain the disappearances. The psychological impact of the unexplained losses is becoming as significant as the material damage to the U-boat fleet. German submarine commanders are beginning to report increased stress and anxiety when operating in areas where boats have vanished, even though they can't identify any specific threat." Kapitän Leutnant Werner Hartmann, commander of U-156, describes the psychological pressure during a debriefing after his return from patrol. "It's not the depth charges that worry us anymore. We know how to handle those. It's the uncertainty. You never know if you're going to simply disappear. The fear of the unknown is proving more effective than conventional anti-submarine weapons in reducing the aggressiveness and effectiveness of German submarine operations. Commanders who once pressed home attacks against heavily defended convoys are now more cautious, more likely to break off engagements when faced with determined opposition. But the most disturbing aspect of the situation is that German naval intelligence has no explanation for what's happening to their submarines. The loss pattern suggests a new Allied capability, but there's no evidence of new technology, new tactics, or new weapon systems. We're fighting an enemy we can't see, can't understand, and can't counter," Dönitz concludes during a meeting with his senior commanders. "Until we figure out what's happening to our boats, we have to assume that every patrol could be a death sentence." Meanwhile, 800 miles away in the North Atlantic, the crew of U-203 is about to become the next victims of the weapon that German intelligence can't identify or understand. Captain Lieutenant Rolf Mutzelberg has been hunting convoy ONS-92 for 3 days, waiting for the right opportunity to attack the heavily defended formation of merchant vessels. At 31, Mutzelberg is one of Germany's most successful submarine commanders, with 26 confirmed sinkings and a reputation for aggressive tactics that have made him a legend among U-boat crews. But Mutzelberg is also beginning to feel the psychological pressure that's affecting the entire German submarine fleet. He's heard the stories about boats that simply vanish, and he's noticed that his own crew seems more nervous than usual during this patrol. Convoy bearing 045 degrees, range 6,000 meters, reports his executive officer, Oberleutnant Hans Schneider, who 8 merchant vessels, 4 escort destroyers, recommend attack approach from port quarter. Mutzelberg studies the tactical situation through his periscope, calculating attack angles and escape routes with the precision that has kept him alive through 18 combat patrols. The convoy is following a predictable zigzag pattern, and the escort vessels are maintaining standard anti-submarine search patterns. Prepare tubes 1 through 4, set depth 4 meters, spread pattern Bravo. The torpedo attack that follows is flawlessly executed, with 2 of Mutzelberg's torpedoes finding their targets and sending a tanker and a cargo vessel to the bottom in spectacular explosions. But the success of the attack also triggers the response that Mutzelberg has been dreading. HMS Starling, one of the convoy's escort destroyers, immediately begins the systematic search for the attacking submarine. The destroyer's commander, Lieutenant Commander Frederick Walker, is one of the Royal Navy's most experienced submarine hunters, with 7 confirmed U-boat kills and an intuitive understanding of German submarine tactics. Sonar contact, bearing 180 degrees, range 2,000 yards, reports the sonar operator. Classification, submarine, twin screws, moving at slow speed. Walker smiles with the satisfaction of a hunter who has found his prey. But unlike previous anti-submarine engagements, he has a new weapon at his disposal, one that will allow him to attack the submarine without revealing the nature of the threat. Prepare Hedgehog attack, range 2,000 yards, bearing 180 degrees. The Hedgehog mortar fires its 24 projectiles with the same muffled thumping sound that has puzzled German submarine commanders throughout the North Atlantic. But Mutzelberg, like his colleagues, doesn't recognize the sound as an anti-submarine weapon. Unknown sound from the destroyer, he reports to his crew. Possibly signal rockets or communication equipment. Maintain silent running. The 24 projectiles sink silently through the dark water toward U-203, their contact fuses armed and ready to detonate on impact. Mutzelberg and his crew wait in the submarine's control room, listening for the explosions that will tell them whether the destroyer's attack has succeeded or failed. But the silence continues, and Mutzelberg begins to believe that whatever the destroyer fired has missed its target completely. No explosions, he observes with relief. Whatever they were trying to do, it didn't work. Prepare to change depth and bearing. There's the first Hedgehog projectile strikes U-203's pressure hull at 13:47 hours. Its contact fuse detonating 35 pounds of high explosive directly against the submarine structure. The explosion is smaller than a conventional depth charge, but it's also much more focused, creating a hole in the hull that immediately begins flooding the submarine. The second projectile hits the conning tower, destroying the submarine's periscope and radio equipment. The third penetrates the engine room, causing massive flooding that overwhelms the submarine's pumps and electrical systems. "So, we're hit," Schneider shouts over the sound of rushing water and failing systems. "So, multiple hull breaches, flooding in all compartments." Mutzelberg stares in shock at the damage reports, unable to understand how his submarine has been destroyed by an attack that he never heard coming. Like Müller before him, he's been killed by a weapon that attacks the fundamental assumptions of submarine warfare. "Our emergency surface, all hands abandon ship," Mutzelberg orders, but he already knows it's too late. U-203 is sinking faster than its crew can escape, and most of them will go down with their boat. The few survivors who manage to reach the surface are picked up by HMS Starling, becoming prisoners of war who carry with them the terror of an attack they can't explain or understand. "What happened to our boat?" one of the survivors asks his British captors through a translator. "As we heard, no depth charges, no explosions." "How were we sunk?" The British sailors exchange glances but say nothing, understanding that the psychological impact of the Hedgehog depends partly on maintaining the mystery surrounding its operation. The German survivors are left to wonder what destroyed their submarine, adding to the growing legend of Allied weapons that kill without warning. The interrogation reports from U-203 survivors eventually reach German naval intelligence, but they provide no useful information about the new Allied anti-submarine capability. The survivors can describe the attack, the muffled sounds from the destroyer, the absence of explosions, the sudden and devastating damage to their submarine, but they can't explain how it happened. It was like being struck by lightning, one survivor tells his interrogators. One moment we were safe, the next we were dying. There was no warning, no way to prepare or defend ourselves. The psychological profile that emerges from these interrogations reveals the true power of the Hedgehog as a weapon of terror. German submarine crews are beginning to fear not just death, but the uncertainty that surrounds it. They can prepare for depth charge attacks, but they can't prepare for threats they don't understand. The fear spreads through the U-boat fleet like a contagion, affecting even experienced commanders who have never encountered Hedgehog attacks. The knowledge that submarines are being destroyed by unknown means creates a psychological burden that affects decision-making, aggressiveness, and overall effectiveness. Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock, one of Germany's most decorated submarine commanders, describes the psychological impact during a meeting with Dönitz. "My crew is afraid, and I can't blame them. We're trained to fight enemies we can see and understand. But how do you fight something that kills without warning, without explanation?" The morale crisis in the U-boat fleet is compounded by the secrecy surrounding Hedgehog operations. Allied naval commanders have been instructed to use conventional depth charges alongside Hedgehog attacks, creating the impression that submarines are being destroyed by normal anti-submarine weapons. German intelligence analysts, reviewing the evidence from submarine losses, can find no pattern that would indicate a new Allied capability. The attacks appear to be conventional depth charge engagements, but the results are far more devastating than previous experience would suggest. Either the Allies have dramatically improved their depth charge tactics, God tells Dönitz during one of their briefings, or they have a new weapon that we can't detect or identify. The truth is more complex than either explanation suggests. The Hedgehog is indeed a new weapon, but its effectiveness comes not just from its physical capabilities, but from its psychological impact on German submarine crews who can't understand how it works. The weapon that was designed to solve the technical problems of anti-submarine warfare has become something more powerful, a tool of psychological warfare that attacks the confidence and morale of the enemy as effectively as it destroys their submarines. But the full impact of the Hedgehog campaign is yet to be felt. As more Allied destroyers are equipped with the new weapon, and as German submarine losses mount, the psychological pressure on the U-boat fleet will reach levels that threaten the entire German submarine campaign in the Atlantic. The silent terror of the Hedgehog is about to transform the Battle of the Atlantic from a contest of technology and tactics into a psychological war where fear itself becomes the most powerful weapon. August 15th, 1943. The German submarine base at Lorient has become a place of whispered conversations and haunted faces, where veteran U-boat commanders speak in hushed tones about the mysterious force that has been systematically destroying their fleet. In the past year, German submarine losses in the North Atlantic have increased by 400%, but more importantly, the nature of those losses has created a psychological crisis that threatens the entire U-boat campaign. Submarines continue to disappear without explanation, their crews vanishing into the depths without leaving any clues about what destroyed them. Kapitänleutnant Otto Kretschmer, Germany's most successful submarine commander, sits in the officers' mess, trying to make sense of intelligence reports that describe a pattern of destruction unlike anything in naval warfare history. 47 boats lost in the past 6 months, Kretschmer tells his colleague, Kapitänleutnant Joachim Schepke. And in every case, the same story. No warning, no conventional depth charge attack, just sudden and catastrophic damage that sinks the boat in minutes. Schepke nods grimly, understanding that they're discussing more than just tactical setbacks. The mysterious losses are destroying the psychological foundation of German submarine warfare, creating a fear that goes beyond normal combat stress. "My crew is requesting transfers," Schepke admits quietly. Experienced men who have survived dozens of depth charge attacks are afraid to go to sea. They say it's not the enemy they fear, it's the unknown. The conversation reflects a broader crisis affecting the entire German submarine fleet. Crews who once pressed home attacks against heavily defended convoys are now reluctant to engage Allied shipping. Commanders who once showed aggressive initiative are becoming cautious and defensive, and the overall effectiveness of U-boat operations has declined dramatically. But the most disturbing aspect of the situation is that German naval intelligence still has no explanation for what's happening to their submarines. Despite intensive analysis of survivor reports, intercepted communications and captured Allied equipment, they have found no evidence of new anti-submarine weapons or tactics. "Hubby, we're fighting ghosts," observes Conter-Admiral Dönitz during a meeting with his senior staff. "Our boats are being destroyed by an enemy we can't see, can't understand, and can't counter. The psychological impact is becoming as significant as the material losses." The psychological warfare aspect of the Hedgehog campaign has exceeded even the most optimistic projections of Allied naval planners. The weapon was designed to improve the effectiveness of anti-submarine attacks, but its greatest success has been in destroying German morale and confidence. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, now commanding a flotilla of Hedgehog-equipped destroyers, has become one of the Royal Navy's most successful submarine hunters. But he's also begun to understand the broader implications of the psychological warfare campaign he's helping to conduct. "We're not just sinking U-boats," Morrison tells his officers during a briefing aboard HMS Starling. "We're destroying their will to fight." German submarine commanders are becoming afraid to attack convoys because they don't know what's waiting for them. And the effectiveness of the psychological campaign is evident in German submarine tactics, which have become increasingly defensive and cautious. U-boat commanders who once attacked convoys with aggressive determination now break off engagements at the first sign of organized opposition. "They're not fighting like the same Navy that nearly brought us to our knees in 1940, observes Captain Donald McIntyre, one of the Royal Navy's most experienced escort commanders. "They seem afraid, uncertain, reluctant to press home attacks even when they have tactical advantages." The transformation of German submarine warfare reflects the cumulative psychological impact of 18 months of Hedgehog operations. The weapon has created a new kind of terror that attacks the fundamental assumptions submarine commanders have developed about underwater warfare. But the most dramatic example of the Hedgehog's psychological impact comes during an encounter between HMS Starling and U-238, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Horst Hepp, one of Germany's most experienced submarine officers. Hepp has been hunting convoy SC-143 for 2 days, waiting for an opportunity to attack the formation of merchant vessels. But his approach to the convoy is cautious, almost reluctant, reflecting the psychological burden that has been affecting German submarine operations. "Convoy bearing 090 degrees, range 8,000 meters, reports his executive officer, Oberleutnant Franz Weber, and 12 merchant vessels, 6 escort destroyers. Recommend attack approach from starboard quarter." Hepp studies the tactical situation through his periscope, but his analysis is colored by the fear that has been haunting German submarine commanders throughout the Atlantic. He knows that attacking this convoy could result in the mysterious destruction that has claimed so many of his colleagues. "Ich prepare tubes 1 and 2 only," Hepp orders, choosing a limited attack that will allow for quick escape rather than the aggressive multi-torpedo spread that would maximize damage to the convoy. The torpedo attack that follows is successful, but limited, sinking 1 merchant vessel, but leaving the convoy largely intact. More importantly, Hepp's cautious approach allows the escort vessels to locate his submarine quickly and begin an immediate counterattack. HMS Starling, under Morrison's command, detects U-238 within minutes of the torpedo attack and begins the systematic hunt that has become routine for Hedgehog-equipped destroyers. A sonar contact, bearing 270 degrees, range 1,800 yards, reports the sonar operator. And classification, submarine, twin screws, moving at slow speed. Morrison prepares for what has become a familiar routine, the Hedgehog attack that will either destroy the submarine or force it to reveal its position through evasive maneuvers. Prepare Hedgehog attack, range 1,800 yards, bearing 270 degrees. But this time something different happens. As the Hedgehog mortar prepares to fire, Morrison receives an unexpected radio transmission from the German submarine. "British destroyer, this is German submarine U-238. The message comes through in heavily accented English. "We surrender. We are surfacing. Do not attack." Morrison stares at the radio in disbelief, unable to understand why an experienced German submarine commander would surrender without being forced to the surface by depth charge attacks or other conventional anti-submarine measures. "Sir, the submarine is surfacing," reports the lookout. "And I can see the conning tower breaking the surface." U-238 emerges from the depths like a steel whale, its crew already visible on the deck with their hands raised in surrender. It's an unprecedented sight. A German submarine surrendering voluntarily rather than fighting or attempting to escape. The interrogation of Kapitänleutnant Hepp and his crew reveals the full extent of the psychological damage that the Hedgehog campaign has inflicted on German submarine operations. "I could not risk my crew," Hepp explains to his British captors. "We have heard too many stories about boats that simply disappear, about crews that vanish without explanation. I chose surrender over the unknown." The psychological profile that emerges from Hepp's interrogation demonstrates how effectively the Hedgehog has transformed the mental landscape of submarine warfare. German commanders are no longer just afraid of death. They're afraid of the uncertainty that surrounds it. "We can prepare for depth charges, for ramming attacks, for conventional anti-submarine warfare," Hepp continues. "But how do you prepare for something you don't understand? How do you fight an enemy that kills without warning, without explanation?" The surrender of U-238 marks a turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic, but not because of its tactical significance. Instead, it represents the psychological collapse of German submarine warfare, the moment when fear of the unknown becomes more powerful than military discipline or national loyalty. The news of Hepp's surrender spreads through the German submarine fleet like wildfire, creating a crisis of confidence that affects even the most experienced commanders. If a veteran like Hepp can choose surrender over combat, what does that say about the nature of the threat they're facing? The psychological impact is becoming more significant than the physical destruction, Dönitz observes during an emergency meeting with his staff. "We're losing submarines to fear as much as we're losing them to enemy action." The crisis deepens when German intelligence finally identifies the Hedgehog through captured Allied equipment and prisoner interrogations. But understanding the weapon's technical capabilities doesn't reduce its psychological impact. If anything, it makes the situation worse. "Now we know what's been killing our boats," Gott tells Dönitz after reviewing the intelligence reports. "But knowing doesn't help us counter it. The weapon is too accurate, too silent, too effective. Our commanders know they're facing something they can't defend against." The technical specifications of the Hedgehog reveal why it has been so psychologically devastating. The contact fuses mean that every explosion indicates a direct hit, while the forward-firing capability allows attacking vessels to maintain sonar contact throughout the engagement. Most importantly, the silence of missed attacks creates uncertainty that conventional depth charges never produced. "It's the perfect psychological weapon," Dönitz concludes. "It kills efficiently when it hits, and it creates terror when it misses. Our commanders never know whether they've been attacked or not, whether they're safe or in mortal danger." The German response to the Hedgehog threat involves both tactical and psychological countermeasures. New submarine tactics emphasize deeper diving, more aggressive evasive maneuvers, and earlier disengagement from convoy attacks. But the psychological damage has already been done. German submarine operations in the North Atlantic declined dramatically throughout 1943, not just because of increased losses, but because of reduced aggressiveness and effectiveness among surviving crews. The U-boat fleet that once brought Britain to the brink of starvation has been transformed into a defensive force that avoids contact with Allied shipping whenever possible. The final assessment of the Hedgehog campaign comes from an unexpected source. Kapitänleutnant Kretschmer, writing from a British prisoner of war camp after his own capture. "The Allies did not defeat us with superior technology or overwhelming numbers," Kretschmer writes in a letter that will be intercepted by German intelligence. "They defeated us by making us afraid of something we could not understand or control." The Hedgehog was not just a weapon, it was a psychological attack on the foundation of submarine warfare itself. The Battle of the Atlantic officially turns in favor of the Allies in May 1943, when German submarine losses exceed the rate at which new boats can be built and crews can be trained. But the real victory comes from the psychological collapse of German submarine operations, the transformation of aggressive hunters into cautious prey. Morrison retires from active duty in 1945 as a full captain, his career defined by innovations in anti-submarine warfare that saved countless Allied lives and helped win the Battle of the Atlantic. But he also carries with him an understanding of the psychological cost of warfare, the knowledge that the most effective weapons often attack the mind as much as the body. "We created a weapon that was more effective than we ever imagined," Morrison tells his wife during a conversation about his wartime service. "But we also learned that psychological warfare can be more devastating than conventional weapons, and that the fear of the unknown is often more powerful than the fear of death itself." The Hedgehog mortar becomes one of the most successful anti-submarine weapons in naval history, credited with sinking over 50 German U-boats and contributing to the Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. But its greatest achievement may be its demonstration of how technological innovation can be combined with psychological warfare to create weapons that attack both the body and the mind. The lesson of the Hedgehog campaign is not just about technological superiority or tactical innovation. It's about the power of uncertainty as a weapon, the effectiveness of attacking enemy psychology as well as enemy equipment, and the understanding that sometimes the most devastating weapons are the ones that create fear rather than destruction. The silent terror of the Hedgehog succeeded because it challenged the fundamental assumptions that German submarine commanders had developed about underwater warfare. By creating a weapon that killed without warning and missed without explanation, Allied naval engineers transformed the psychological landscape of submarine operations. The German U-boat fleet was defeated not just by superior Allied technology or overwhelming numbers, but by a weapon that made experienced submarine commanders afraid to fight. The Hedgehog proved that psychological warfare could be as effective as conventional weapons in achieving military objectives, and that the fear of the unknown could be more powerful than the most sophisticated military equipment. Stories like this remind us that innovation in warfare often comes from understanding human psychology as much as engineering principles, that the most effective weapons frequently attack the mind as well as the body, and that sometimes the greatest victories are won by making the enemy afraid to fight, rather than by destroying their ability to fight. That's what we explore here. The moments when technological innovation intersects with psychological warfare, when the fear of the unknown becomes a weapon itself, when the silence of uncertainty proves more terrifying than the thunder of conventional explosives. If you believe these stories matter, if you want to understand the complex relationship between technology, psychology, and warfare, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because there are so many more stories like this one, waiting to be told with the honesty and complexity they deserve. You won't want to miss what we discover next.